Who hasn't been to the corner of Michigan and Trumbull? Who hasn't seen a ball game in Tiger Stadium? This is Joe Falls, and as we all know, this is the last year of our old ballpark, and we wanted to pay tribute to it by talking to those who have been a part of the history of Tiger Stadium. Personally, I've covered the Tigers for the past 47 years, and Tom Gage, our baseball writer at the Detroit News, figured out with his handy-dandy calculator that I've spent more than 4 days of my life riding up and down in the press box elevator. So this is really a celebration of Tiger Stadium. It was the idea of Irwin Cohen, a former member of the Tigers front office. We're calling it Echoes of Tiger Stadium, and that was Irwin's idea too. And we begin with George Cantor, columnist for the Detroit News, a man who covered the 1968 champions, who puts it all into perspective for us. George, you've been a lifetime resident of Detroit and also a lifetime follower of the Tigers, okay? Why is this stadium so important, not only to the people in Detroit, but all over Michigan?
I think it speaks to three things. It speaks to the lost city, the Detroit that used to be, the city that most people like to remember and hope that someday we'll be there again. It speaks to childhood. It's one of the most people's fondest memories of being a kid growing up. And it speaks to family, because usually the person that you first shared that experience of going to Tiger Stadium with was your dad or your mother or an older brother, somebody that you held very dear when you were growing up, and that was who took you there for the first time. You know, I can still remember my first game vividly, going to see the Yankees in 1948, and Joe DiMaggio hit a home run off Hal Newhouser, and I can still see that ball going over the 365-foot sign, and I didn't know who Joe DiMaggio was, I didn't know who Hal Newhouser was, they were just names. But that image is as clear as a bell. And I treasure it now because I realize now who these guys were. And I saw this moment, and it'll always be with me. And I was with my dad, and it's a very special memory. Just as I hope my daughter will remember the first time we went to a ball game together in 1983, and she saw Lou Whitaker hit a home run. I don't know who was pitching for Cleveland that day, but I'm sure that's something that'll stay with her, especially because she learned how to yell Lou, and that was that was her big memory for that day. You know, and my grandfather saw Ty Cobb play, and my dad saw Greenberg and Gehringer, and I saw Kaline and Lolich, and my daughter saw Whitaker and Trammell in that ballpark, and that's part of all our memories and always will be.
You know, you've told me in the past when we worked together how much your father meant to you in taking you to these games. How deeply was he into it? I have a sense, and we've been together here, you and I, for many, many decades. Now, I have a sense that your father truly loved going to the ballpark.
I think it was so important to him back in the Depression, when things were really bad for his family, and he was forced to drop out of school and work at a job that he hated. And in the middle of all this, there was the Tigers, and he kept scrapbooks. He kept box scores of every game they played, very orderly pasted into these books from every year from 1934 to 1938. And you could tell they just meant so much to him. And my mother, who at best is an occasional fan, she still speaks with such affection over Schoolboy Rowe and Gehringer. These are the Tigers. You know, everything else afterwards are pale imitations, but those are her Tigers. And it plays a very important part in my family's memory package.
You know, you and I worked together, 68, probably the greatest season that this team ever had, not only to win the pennant as they did after losing it during the strike-torn year in 67, and then beating the Cardinals, coming from behind, winning in St. Louis. Looking back on it, George, now you've written the book on the 1968 champions, what it meant to the city, what it meant to the team, what it meant to yourself. What did Tiger Stadium represent then to a city that was so torn apart, 43 people killed in the riot, millions of dollars of damage? What did it mean, George, in 68 for that team to come back after such a horrific year for everybody and win the ballpark? What did it mean?
The ballpark in 68 represented stability, the way things should be. This was a city that was torn to its core by what had happened to it. There was distrust, there was fear, there was hatred. And yet we could still assemble at this symbol of the past, this symbol of the strong city that used to be, and forget for a little while all the animosities, all the rumors that were going on outside, and get together and cheer for this team. This was our team. It wasn't black, it wasn't white, it was the Tigers. And just as they had always been, they were still there. And in that old ballpark, I think that was part of it too. The setting, the historic setting, knowing that you looked around and you're seeing the same things that you saw when you were a kid growing up. That was important because it was really vital in those years to have that link to the past.
All right, you and I worked again in Tiger Stadium and that vast press box, and we were there at nights and we're grinding out the copy, and we traveled on the road, and we got along pretty good. Tell me something about being a baseball writer for those 4 golden years in your life in the ballpark. What was it like for you to sit there up in the press box where you had never been, okay, as a kid? What was it like in the Tiger Stadium press box for you, working with me, working with these other men, watching the team, interviewing these guys? What was that like for you?
Well, to say that was like a dream come true was an understatement. To get a job like that was beyond my wildest imaginings when I was growing up. That simply couldn't happen. Even when I knew that I was going to go into newspaper work, that was beyond my ambitions. It was just a series of accidents that got me into that job. I wish maybe I had been a little older at the time so I could have appreciated it more, because I was really young and it was happening so fast, and I was right in the middle of 2 of the most exciting seasons in Tiger history, 67 and 68. And I really wish I could have stopped time a little bit better than I did and appreciated it more for what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, the friendships I was making, just the idea of being there. You know, I know when I first set foot on the grass of Tiger Stadium, my first season in 66, I cannot express to you what that felt like. That was for somebody who had grown up in that ballpark and have worshipped the players I saw down there. To be actually standing there myself was a thrill beyond comparison. And then to be privileged to chronicle this pennant and World Series in 68, it's an astonishing thing, you know. And it's been more than 30 years, and I don't think a week goes by when somebody still doesn't mention the fact that I was the baseball writer in 68. And I don't flatter myself that I was that fantastic a baseball writer. I think just the impact that team made on the town, it riveted my name to those events. And it really was, not only a turning point in my career, but a turning point in my life.
You know, what's impressed me about you, George, is that while we worked together only 4 years, you've maintained, I don't want to call it love, because maybe that's the wrong word, but you've maintained this great interest and affection, that's your word, for this ball club. What's that all about?
Well, I love the game. I do love the game. And I think if you grow up in Detroit and the Tigers become a part of your childhood, it gets in your blood and you don't shake it. I have friends who live in Los Angeles, and they get one of those big television dishes and they bring in the telecast from those games. And I know people like this all over the country, and the Tigers see them too when they go to different ballparks in Texas and California. They come out. The Tigers are still their team. The Tigers are truly a national team, and I think it has to do a lot with the memories of being in that stadium when you were a kid. There is something about it that you just never shake. They're your team forever.
Your reaction in '68 when Wirt shot the single to right field, K-Line scored, place went crazy. You remember that the Red Sox had already lost or beaten somebody, Baltimore, I guess it was, and Jim Campbell wouldn't put up the score because he thought there'd be a riot in the ballpark. And then your feelings about going downstairs and seeing that tumultuous scene that we hadn't seen in our life, George. We hadn't seen this, and now here it was.
I remember you writing that this was always happening somewhere else. You never thought that you would see this happening to your ball club that you'd been covering, of course, much longer than I had. And to go down into that clubhouse to the scene of utter madness, The one thing that moved me most that night, I remember, was Bill Freehan. Detroit kid. He understood, maybe more than anyone else, what this meant, the impact this was having on the city. I saw him just almost carrying other people off the field and into the dugout, and my eyes filled with tears because this was, a dream come true for him. And I tried to keep dispassionate because that's my job as a journalist. But, holy cow, this was the team of my childhood. And I was seeing them win the first pennant in my memory. And, I sit and I think about things that happened in those years today, all these years later. And sometimes I get a tear in my eye because I remember the emotional jolt that had for everybody in the city. I don't think anybody who lived through that will ever forget how they felt inside when that all happened.
I enjoyed it all. I enjoyed having you at my side, taking my place as the baseball writer at the Detroit Free Press. I'm going to end it with just a simple comment. The one thing I didn't like, George, and I may as well get it out in public before the fans and God, whoever's going to listen to this tape, the thing I didn't like at all was that you always outwrote me.